Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar organized by Australia-India Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative Partnership Task Force for Indo-Pacific Economy, Security and Sustainability. AIIPOIP Task Force is a joint initiative by the Centre for Public Policy Research, Kochi, and Monash University, Australia. The task force is a product of CPPR and Monash University's decision to come together and pool their academic policy research capacities relating to the Indo-Pacific region and build upon their intellectual capitals to build a robust research agenda on the Indo-Pacific. As part of the task force, we have members from diverse fields of expertise, including ex-service professionals, academicians, conservationists, former ambassadors, security experts, entrepreneurs, science and tech experts, and media persons. CPPR is a public policy think tank in Kochi, Kerala, engaging in a range of sectors like urban governance and mobility, education, livelihood, governance and law, security, and international relations. We have been a pivotal partner in furthering engagements with governments and diplomats of various nations. To know more about what we do, please do visit our website, www.cppr.in, and our social media accounts. Today, we're going to dive into a very interesting topic: ECTA, Synergies and Challenges for India and Australia. I am Sharon Susan Koshi, Research Associate at Centre for Public Policy Research, and today I will be in conversation with Dr. Nisha Taneja, Dr. Karen Barker, and Mr. David Eggleston. Dr. Nisha Taneja is professor at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, or ICRIER, in New Delhi, a leading think tank in India engaged in policy-oriented research. Dr. Taneja is also currently a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Trade and Investment 2023-2024. Earlier, Dr. Taneja served at the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Trade and Investment 2020 to 2022, focusing on trade and gender. Dr. Karen Barker leads project management at the Australia-India Institute with a focus on government projects supporting the bilateral education relationship between Australia and India. Dr. Barker has over 15 years of experience in international education, including leading the International Partnerships team at the University of Melbourne. She previously worked in a strategic planning and operational management role at the divisional level at the University of Melbourne. Before moving into the educational sector, Dr. Barker worked as a government solicitor. Mr. David Eggleston commenced as Deputy Consul-General in Chennai in September 2022. Immediately prior to this, he was a deputy negotiator for Australia's inaugural Green Economy Agreement with Singapore for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or DFAT, in Canberra. Previously, David worked in various trade-related roles, including on the World Trade Organization, agreements on trade facilitation and technical barriers to trade, and on the Australia-United States Free Trade Agreement. Welcome, speakers. Now to go into a little bit of a background for the topic that we are discussing today. The India-Australia Economic and Cooperation Trade Agreement, or ECTA as it's popularly called, came into effect on 29th of December 2022. It is the first significant trade agreement with a major developed nation under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. The ECTA will work as an institutional mechanism to facilitate and enhance trade between nations while covering most tariff lines dealt between the two countries. For Australia, the agreement is significant as the country is transitioning into diversifying its export markets towards India, amongst many others, while also forging improved bilateral trade relations with India. As a result of the ECTA, India is set to benefit from preferential market access and zero duty access to Australian markets, especially for India's labor-intensive sectors, including jewelry and gems, leather, furniture, footwear, textiles, food, engineering products, automobiles, and medical devices. According to the Global Trade Research Initiative, products worth $23 billion will move towards becoming duty-free from the first day of execution. Meanwhile, India would provide preferential access to Australia on more than 70% of its tariff lines in sectors such as coal, mineral ores, wine, and additional raw materials. An additional 1 million employment opportunities will be generated in India, with Australian businesses having significant access to the burgeoning Indian workforce market. In fact, this would work as a step forward in the direction of the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, which would address digital trade, other areas for market access for goods and services, a government procurement chapter to transform the FTA into a CECA, and more. India's expanding trade relations with Australia would give a fillip to investment opportunities, exports, and long-term employment. On this note, the webinar will examine the present and future bilateral trade implications of the Australia-India Economic and Cooperation Trade Agreement, while identifying trade complementarities and synergies between the two nations. Now, my first question is addressed to Mr. David Eggleston. What do you think are the strategic implications and geopolitical relevance for Australia, India, and India as a result of ECTA?
Firstly, thank you, Sharon and CPPR for putting this webinar together. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion from the panelists today. But in response to your question, so firstly, ECTA is a trade agreement and enables Australian and Indian businesses and consumers to take advantage of new trade opportunities. So if we look at goods, so 96% of Indian goods exports will enter Australia duty-free initially, and then over the next 3 years, this will rise to 100%. For Indian consumers and businesses, they will benefit from over 85% of Australian goods exports entering India duty-free, and this will rise to 90% within 6 years. On the services side, so ECTA will provide greater certainty for both Australian and Indian firms to supply services across borders and to better establish local operations, which I think we'd all agree is very important to take forward our bilateral relationship. ECTA also enables strong mobility outcomes, which will strengthen our existing already strong but growing people-to-people links, also supporting trade and business and contributing to greater cultural exchanges. So these tariff reductions and improved services outcomes will enable Australia to better support India's growth strategy and to plug into the power of being made in India. Secondly, by eliminating tariffs on key manufacturing exports, Australia and India can strengthen supply chains and build resilience to better withstand any future supply chain shocks. And I think we've all seen the impact of COVID-19 and some of those supply chain shocks. So we're looking for ECTA to help build better resilience between Australia and India in supply chains. Thirdly, ECTA helps to unlock potential growth in priority sectors that can benefit from advancements in digital and low emissions technology. So for example, Indian tariffs have been eliminated on most Australian critical minerals. So this will better support India's aspiration of becoming a global manufacturing hub, including for electric vehicles and ambitious renewable energy targets. And it will also help and better help support India's smart cities infrastructure and needs with an urban population which is expected to reach 640 million by 2035. But also when we look more generally beyond ECTA itself and beyond the trade agreement, as our trade and economic partnership grows, so do our strategic ties. So the agreement will complement our Australia-India Comprehensive Strategic Partnership and also the government's implementation of the update to the India Economic Strategy. We're also both members of the Quad and G20 members and very much looking forward to India's hosting of G20 in 2023. And also we're both members of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF. So these engagements demonstrate how we are working together to ensure the Indo-Pacific region stays resilient, inclusive, free and open, and able to tackle the biggest challenges of our time, including climate change and the security of our region. So Australia is committed to growing its relationship with India, This includes opening a Consulate-General in Bengaluru in 2023, including to tap into the startup and critical technology sector that's growing in Bengaluru. And we're also committed to working with India to build on the outcomes of ACTA by negotiating a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, Sharon, which you mentioned earlier, which we call CECA. So through CECA, Australia hopes to further deepen our bilateral trade relationship with India by achieving greater market access for goods and services not included in ACTA, but also addressing broader trade issues such as investment, cooperation, sustainable development, digital trade, and government procurement.
Thank you, David. Now my next question is addressed to Dr. Taneja. So what do you think is the significance between this particular free trade agreement between India and Australia, given that India has in fact walked out of similar agreements in the past?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here on the panel. And before I start, and just to add to the introductions that you made, I very recently visited Australia as part of the Special Visits Program, which was actually sponsored by the Australian government. And I think, not only was I able to share the nuances of the agreement and how we can actually benefit, how both countries can actually benefit from it, but it helped me to understand both sides. And I think it was a wonderful experience, and I must thank the Australian government for that, because it really, I think these kind of interactions really help in bridging information gaps, and they help in building better understanding. And I think that would really lie at the root of the success of the ECTA. And this could be done at multiple levels, at the business to business level, at the level of policymakers, at the level of businesses, at the level of civil society. And I think that would really contribute to making the most of the ECTA. Yeah, that's a very positive note. But coming back to your question, which is that we walked out of the RCEP. And yes, I think at that moment, India was a little confused about how it should frame its FTAs and how it should take this forward. And India, Australia, I think in that sense is really very significant, because it's actually laid the ground for future FTAs. So it is a historic agreement on that count. And not only is it, very broad in scope, it's also very deep in its commitments. And it's also, everything is time bound. And I think that, to my mind, is a very important feature of the ECTA. And going forward, I think it's going to help all our other FTAs, whether it is the UK or the EU or Israel or Canada. I think it's going to really set the standard for all the coming FTAs. But I think maybe we should start with where we stand vis-a-vis our current trade. And, last year, I think we were suddenly bouncing back from COVID, and we saw unprecedented increase in trade. And after 2 years of dipping in to bilateral trade, we actually the bilateral trade actually came to levels that were higher than pre-COVID levels. So in that sense, I think there's been a lot of progress on the bilateral trade front. A concern amongst the Indian academic community and even otherwise businesses has been that there is a large trade deficit between the two countries. Theorists will tell us that we should never be concerned about a bilateral deficit, and we should always be looking at an overall trade deficit, and that too in the context of other macroeconomic variables. So it should never be looked at in isolation. And also the composition of this deficit is very important, whether it is, capital goods or consumer goods or raw material. So that is also very, very important. Having said that, I think last year there was a very substantial increase in our trade, and let me also come to the composition because I think if you look at exports, for instance, the dependence has always been on very few items. So we have a very concentrated export basket. So last year, 56% of our exports were just accounted for by refined petroleum. And this was up from 28% the previous year. And I think we all know the reason, and we were talking about geopolitics. And this is how geopolitics and geoeconomics is getting intertwined. And we've seen this this massive increase in exports of refined petroleum. There are other important exports as well, and the other items are pharmaceuticals and gems and jewelry. Now, if you look at our import basket, again, we find that imports are very concentrated, and there's one large item, that's coal, which accounts for 78% of our total imports. So clearly, one very clear message is that going forward, when we're looking at ECTA, we should be looking at diversifying our export basket. And for that matter, even our imports. Now, if you look at exports, we've always had a defensive strategy, in the sense that our focus has always been on where should we, how should we not reduce tariffs. And we've never really looked at how can we increase our exports. I don't like to use the word offensive strategy. It doesn't sound right. But a market access strategy is clearly something that's been missing in our own policy. And you look at countries around the world, they always have a market access strategy. It's, very few countries would actually play defensive. And for India, it makes more sense to be looking at a market access strategy, because for a country like Australia, where tariffs are already low, okay, the game is not in tariffs at all. So it's all about how do you access the market and what are the barriers in accessing the foreign market. And, I think even though if both countries are looking at increasing market access, how would we look at the other side of the coin, which is the other flow, import in both cases. I think here one a common binding factor today is diversification away from China. And I think that's very perceptible. The supply chain diversification, market diversification is very, very perceptible now at the business level. And, I think so far it's been in the last 3-4 years when we were talking about supply chain resilience, it was being talked about, or even in the context of the Quad, it was being talked about in a larger context at the government to government level. But now it's very perceptible at the business level. And therefore, it's only now that we'll see a change in how markets are getting diversified, because it's the businesses that are feeling the need to diversify. We also tried to look at, what is the kind of export potential that India has. And what we looked at was, what is it that India can export? What is it that India is exporting to the world? And what is it that Australia is importing from the rest of the world, but not from India? And which are the items where India is globally competitive? So clearly, what we're trying to see is, can Australia actually import items from India in which India is globally competitive? And looking at that, we found that actually the export potential is 127 billion. So that's huge. Okay, so that tells us how much untapped potential there is. And what's also interesting is that if we look at the commodity-wise breakdown, the potential is very high. It's the highest actually in items that are already being traded. It's where current trade is very high, which is refined petrochemicals and pharmaceuticals. These are the two largest items. And this is where the largest untapped potential also is. So, which means that we can, export a lot more of these items. But also there is a lot of potential in other items, which are literally not being traded at all right now. For instance, cellular phones and or ready-made garments, leather. These are items, furniture. These are items where India is doing well, but these are items that Australia is importing from elsewhere. And interestingly, it's actually the dependence on China. So, so how is it that we can actually increase exports of these items to Australia? And I think here there are two issues. One is how do we actually meet the standards, product standards, environmental standards, and a lot of cooperation would be needed here between the two countries. And this is where ECTA would play a very important role in terms of how can we build mechanisms where Indian businesses can meet the product standards that Australian regulators lay out. That would be a very, very important aspect. The other thing is, if we look at items like ready-made garments or furniture, here I think there is a very strong element of taste and preferences. Clearly, the Indian businesses have not understood the Australian taste. And maybe if at the design end, the two businesses could actually set up a mechanism to understand what is it that the Australian consumer needs or demands, would be very, very, very helpful. Or, because all it means is a little bit of tweaking to satisfy the Australian consumer. So maybe I'll stop here and then wait for the next round of questions.
Thank you, Dr. Taneja, for elaborately breaking down, the export-import scenario between India and Australia. There will be a follow-up question regarding China, because one can't talk about geopolitics and geoeconomics without mentioning the dragon, I assume. So my next question is addressed to Dr. Barker. How do you think the new free trade agreement between India and Australia will reflect in the foreign direct investment, particularly in the education sector?
Thanks, Sharon. That's a great question. Just before I respond, I just want to acknowledge that I'm here in Melbourne at the Australia-India Institute, and I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So they're the First Nations of Australia, and I just want to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Great question about foreign direct investment, especially because generally education itself is thought to be a driver of FDI, and that's because it's linked to skilled graduates and the quality of the skilled labour force, which is a driver for business to invest and access that labour force. And we know that countries with strong higher education systems and quality education are the countries that attract the strongest foreign direct investment. But we know that ECTA is also paving the way for FDI into education sector, and that is because it's providing opportunities for Australian and Indian education services providers to supply services into each other's country. So I think India's education sector is going to be worth about $225 billion in 2025, and Australia's education services sector is not quite that large, but it is a really important sector in Australia and ever growing. So there is potential for significant investment, and we can see if we can, increase those estimates beyond what's currently expected, just because the ECTA has been introduced. Australian providers are going to have market access in India for the supply of services on favourable terms, or the best possible terms. So that's going to be a real draw card for Australian education services providers. And there's two main areas under the trade agreement where there's a lot of attention. And one of those is the provision of transnational or cross-border online education. And Australia and India are already very active, both active in that area. And we know that India has recently introduced some legislation to opening up online education in India. And that happened even before COVID. So I think it was 2018, we had some regulations that allowed 20% of courses to be online. And since COVID, that's it opened up even further, and we can expect that to continue to happen. So Australia and India have already been collaborating in this area, and the Institute's published a couple of reports on those collaborations and where other opportunities might lie. So I think, you know, the trade agreement is a great opportunity for the sector to galvanise that work. There's Australia is very big on online education and also on education technology. So EdTech is another area where Australia and India can collaborate, and I think that the trade agreement facilitates that. So the agreement itself has some regulations around how that might work. So there will be some regulatory controls. So the online education provided by Australian education must meet Australia's quality demands and regulations, and also they must meet India's regulations around online provision of courses. So the other area that where this is opening up is the possibility of Australian universities to open up branch campuses in India. And I think generally the Australian sector is a not-for-profit sector, but private providers operate in different ways. So at the moment, there's Indian regulations that just came out just a few weeks ago, I think, from the UGC, saying yes, they're open to the top 500 global universities investing, opening up branch campuses in India, and that we know that Gujarat is the state where they've already taken some action to make that happen, and they've got an area called Gift City, which is even I think before UGC was already preparing to invite branch campuses to open up there. And the University of Wollongong is the first Australian university to explore the opportunities there. So I think we'll see some more collaboration with India in that area as well. I mean, there's still some regulations about what, even in Gift City, I think they're restricting it to fintech and financial management and some of the STEM, the science, technology, engineering and management courses. But I think we'll see some more activity from Australia into India for education services, and I guess there's reciprocal opportunity for Indian universities and institutions to open up campuses in Australia. So I think that what we're seeing is what we will be seeing will be a whole lot of new activity around online and EdTech in particular, but also just the growing interest in what the opportunities for branch campuses might be, because the trade agreement makes it more financially viable to have these kinds of activities.
Thank you, Karen. I'll come back to the one on reciprocal based work opportunities later. But now moving on to David again. We always, in news reports especially, and experts on geopolitics, characterize this particular agreement as an opportune moment, perhaps in history, for diversifying trade partners. And this is very key when you consider the current geopolitical reality, right? So how do you think the deal is accelerating Australia's trade partner diversification, which is already underway? Because we see that Australia is moving, although slowly away into partners like South Korea, Japan, the ASEAN countries, Taiwan, and so on. So how do you think this particular trade agreement will accelerate that piece?
Well, thank you for the question, Sharon. And look, as the world's 5th largest and fastest growing economy in the world, India is a significant economy in its own right, and the Indian market naturally presents significant opportunities for Australian business and investors alike. And ECTA will help to secure Australia's access to the Indian market. We both stand to deliver from ECTA across a range of sectors and industries, and which is why we both have pursued the agreement over the number of years that we have. So further, ECTA will also give Australian exporters a competitive advantage in the Indian market and offers new opportunities for trade diversification. A rapidly growing India would need many of the world-class goods and services Australian exporters can provide. So that includes in critical minerals, education and skills training, as we've just heard, and also in healthcare. But equally, Australian businesses looking to diversify their supply chains will see Indian goods and services exports such as pharmaceuticals, textiles, homewares, and IT as more attractive. And I particularly like your comment, Nisha, around how initially supply chain issues was really at the government-to-government level, but it is, I think, very much being seen at the business level, and it actually is now business who are seeing the need to diversify their markets as the supply chain shocks have really, been pursued around the world. But when we look at trade diversification, so we can look at it from a market perspective, and you mentioned China, Sharon. Australia has an excellent network of FTAs, including bilateral FTAs with China, with South Korea, with the United States, the United Kingdom, and China. We've also got regional FTAs with ASEAN, RCEP, and also the CPPRIndia members. So all these FTAs offer benefits to Australia and the members, including for trade diversification. In terms of China, Australia is working towards a stable relationship with China, including navigating trade differences through dialogue. However, Australia's international relations should not be viewed only through the lens of China. India is one of our closest partners, and our ambition and vision for this relationship, I think, should speak for itself. But when we look at trade diversification, we can also look at that through the context of developing trade in new and emerging sectors. So look at it from a sectoral approach. And we see ECTA as enabling both Australia and India to grow our trade in these new and emerging sectors, so in particular to address the challenges of climate change. So a significant outcome in the ECTA is that it will help expedite India's and Australia's ambitions to become leaders in renewable energy. So Australia's critical minerals are essential components of low emissions technologies, such as batteries, solar panels, and electric vehicles. So by reducing the cost of these critical minerals, that'll help to drive forward innovation in low emissions technologies. But ECTA will also reduce the cost of imports into other industries, many of which India has fantastic capabilities, including for steel, textiles, and also in food processing. So thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, David. Now, I would like to pose a similar question again on the lines of geopolitics to Dr. Taneja. Here we are again talking about China. I mean, India and Australia have a diversified and a strong partnership in multilateral and bilateral initiatives, including Quad, right? But how do you think this particular trade partnership will help India to diversify its partnerships in multi-sectoral trade, especially given that we are also talking about a time, I mean, we are also speaking at a time in history where we are also looking at trade partnerships that is away from China's influence or diversifying our supply chains. So how do you respond to this, Dr. Taneja?
Yeah, I think today the whole world is looking at diversifying supply chains, and and we're talking about resilient supply chains. There was a time when we talked about supply chains, we only talked about time, cost, and reliability. And today there is a fourth factor that's been added, which is resilience. And diversification is the key to resilience. And so it's not just, so we have to be looking at how to diversify our export market, how to diversify our sourcing markets. So, and clearly it's somehow the whole world has come to depend on China for both export and import. And therefore it's become a common problem. So when we're talking about the Quad, it's a common problem that we're trying to face. And in terms of strategy, I think it is very important that we think of a resilient supply chain. And how is it that the four countries could actually come together to think of how these resilient supply chains could be built. And here, I think one of the key elements to having a resilient supply chain is also digitization, the dependence on digital networks to ensure resilience. And Australia can play a very important role here in, or the two countries could actually work together in building these tech-enabled supply chains, digitally driven supply chains, which make them far more resilient. Now, this is at the next level. All of us recognize that market diversification is key, but at the next level, then we need to talk about how do you make the supply chain more resilient. And also between India and Australia, I think one major area of cooperation is R&D. Australia has a huge strength in research and development, and we could actually, all across the sectors, we could actually be building partnerships in R&D, because innovation is going to be key to the fourth industrial revolution, and we could be partners in that, and leverage on each other's strengths. India has a huge skilled manpower. And that can be leveraged for these kind of activities. So there are a lot of opportunities basically for diversifying supply chains, which the two countries can work together on. But there's one other aspect, which is that foreign direct investment kind of is the route to creating supply chains. And that's what strengthens them. That's what embeds them in another economy. That's what creates strong linkages between trade and investment. And here, I think there is a lot of potential for Australian investment to come into various sectors into India. And with India's production-linked incentive scheme, I think there is a whole range of sectors that have now opened up. In 14 sectors, this is being offered. And it's a great scheme because it's actually giving an incentive which is WTO compliant. And it's based on production and not on exports. And it encourages both domestic and foreign investment. And it's in a whole range of sectors, from automobiles to semiconductors, textiles, processed foods. So there's a lot of potential here. And during my visit to Australia, I felt that amongst the businesses, there was a concern that India is such a huge country. So where should we go and invest? There are so many states. To them, it's like so many different mini countries. And so where should they go? And here, I think the Indian government brings out a wonderful document, which is called the LEADS. It's a it ranks all the states in terms of logistics and other business indicators. So using that, any business house could actually look at all the states, compare all the indicators, and see which are the variables that work for them, and they can choose the state that they would like to. And it's all on the government website. These reports are all on the Commerce Ministry's website. So I think that's a very, very important tool that businesses can use to enter the Indian market. And also, I think even if you're not thinking about the production-linked incentive scheme, the range of sectors is like it's there is defense, which doesn't get covered under the PLI scheme, but it's a sector where there are a lot of opportunities, and the Indian government is looking at. We've actually stopped imports of 101 defense items, and the focus is really on manufacturing in India. So that's an inbuilt incentive by itself. So that's again an opportunity for Australian businesses to enter into the Indian market.
Thank you, Dr. Taneja. Now, actually, my next question to Karen is again, could be linked to what Dr. Taneja was also talking about. We were talking about how reciprocal work-based immigration routes will be provided for Australian students post-study. But now there are so many universities, so many sectors in India that these opportunities can be leveraged on. What all sectors in India do you think will be able to provide that sort of a skill-based training for students Australians who complete their studies in the home country to come to India to get that professional training experience? What is your take on that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I was just reflecting as both David and Nisha were talking about when India's Minister for Commerce and Industry, Minister Goyal, came to Australia and joined with our Trade Minister to launch ECTA, and there was a lot of enthusiasm about the role of education and the opportunities that ECTA would provide to students and graduates from both countries. So, I mean, it's a really good question about which sectors, and I think from the Australian point of view, the students and graduates here see India as a global leader in ICT, information and communication technologies. And I think that sector, the IT sector and the communication sector and the technology sector, is a big draw card for Australian graduates. I think that would hold great appeal. Some of the studies that we've done on around internships that are built into study indicate the students that are most interested in work experiences in India themselves come from an Indian diaspora background. So they're fueled by their interest in connecting or reconnecting with family and culture in India. But that's not the whole story, because there are still a number of other students without a diaspora background who would also be interested, and part of the driver is that or the drivers that could be there are, on the one hand, there's a large number of Indian multinational companies that have now got head offices not head offices, but offices in Australia. So they've got Australian based offices, and their brand names are starting to resonate across university sectors. The university sectors looking to them to host interns during study. The students and graduates also, so they're recognising the brand, and they're seeing those Indian multinational companies as potential employers of the future. So these are graduates looking for global employment experiences and opportunities. And so Indian multinational companies have a certain allure. They know the brand. There might be Infosys or TCS or Wipro or pharmaceuticals, as well as tech companies. So I think the tech sector is probably the biggest draw card for India, I would say, for Australian graduates. And the multinational factor is something that it offers brand recognition in Australia first off, but also in India it offers a global workplace, but also one that provides a local Indian experience. So I think there's a combination of factors that would influence graduates' decisions there. But I do see ICT and tech, and maybe some of the other like fintech and pharmaceuticals would be other big sectors drawing the graduates.
Right. Thank you. Absolutely. Next to David. Now we are in the last round. So we're going to ask you a round of final questions to basically round up the discussion here today. what would be the challenges in ensuring, or what could be the challenges that India and Australia could face in actually bringing the ECTA to 100% success?
And thank you for the question. I think the key challenge is in raising awareness of ECTA to business and industry for them to take advantage of the commercial benefits which ECTA will enable. So these benefits will be delivered over several years. So it is important for business to look at the medium term and see how the tariff reductions will change over the future years and how the other initiatives of ECTA can help business better undertake trade between Australia and India. So I think to kind of address this challenge, the Australian government is implementing a comprehensive advocacy plan and working closely with our trade investment arm, so Austrade, and working with the Chambers of Commerce in Australia and in India to help business and industry better understand what these benefits are. On both sides, we want to see a higher utilisation of business using ECTA. Of course, we're only a few days, a couple of weeks into ECTA, but we want to make sure that business are aware and so that over time they will start using it. And we know there are a number of colleagues across industries, including education, which we have here, but also across manufacturing, agriculture, renewable energy, to ensure that these benefits are better understood by business and industry. So DFAT, so my department, also has a two-way FTA portal, which outlines the changes to tariffs over each year of the FTA. So it works for both Australian and Indian businesses. So you can just put in what you're looking to trade over what period, and it will come out with the tariff and how that tariff changes over time. So we would urge business and industry to use that tariff, that FTA portal. We also have a detailed guide on our website on using ECTA. And how you can import and export goods from Australia. So we've got these tools out there to help business better understand the benefits. And then I think finally, we're also looking forward to an ambitious CECA, as we mentioned before, so the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, which we will look to, to help to unlock the full potential of our economic partnership. So I think that's the main challenges there.
Thank you, David. Dr. Taneja, again, how do you, looking forward, how do you think ECTA would affect our overall volume and trade between India and Australia?
It would, there's no doubt that it would impact positively because the institutional framework has been laid out. Now, a lot of it is going to be driven by the businesses. So it all depends on how the businesses take this forward. And also, there needs to be a very close interaction between government and businesses. And I really like what the Australian government puts out on its website. All communications from the industry are put up on the website. And that I think that's really good. If the Indian government could also do that and load all the concerns of Indian businesses, I think these kind of issues would help businesses to understand each other and form partnerships also, and identify areas of mutual interest. So that I think would be very, very helpful. Also, going forward, there are no timelines for CECA. I wish there was a timeline for CECA also, because now we've come this far and it's been a very successful journey, and we should set an example by an early culmination of CECA. So because there's no timeline, it's a challenge. Thirdly, I think, again, a lot of, we need more interactions between regulators, because whether it is services or it is goods, it's all now about the regulations that are there in either country and how we can meet standards in each other's countries. So that is going to be the core deciding factor for market access. And that's where maybe we need to put in a little more effort and work. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Taneja. And finally, to Dr. Walker, how can India and Australia look to further concretize our synergies in sectors of education, training, technology, and so on?
It's a really good combination of factors, isn't it? It's tech and training and education. And we know that both India and Australia, like many other countries, is facing a skills shortage. And Australia's always looked to India to supply our skills gaps. India is now offering a lot more opportunities for high-level skills employment at home. So there's fewer people looking globally for employment in that area. And although India, I think, is the second largest producer of skills graduates in the world after China, India is still looking to increase its skills graduates. So I think there's opportunities for Australia and India to collaborate in developing the skills, high-level skills training at university level. And so there's opportunities there to tap into online courses. We know ECTA is providing new opportunities for online. I think we've got to bring industry into the mix. Industry obviously knows what skills it needs now and what it's anticipating skills already for the future. And we know that combination of collaboration between companies and education has, about pooling the resources together can have real benefits. The other area I think that the education sectors could work together on is about providing incubators for emerging technologies and startups. So India is absolutely a leader here, the entrepreneurship in India is a real example for Australia to follow. And I think it'd be fantastic if Australia and India could collaborate on, to provide incubators for startups and that emerging technology. And also, I think, that opportunities to provide work placement and internship opportunities while still studying, as well as the post-study work opportunities. There's work under ECTA for mutual recognition of qualifications. And I think that would be very advantageous for the flow of skilled labour between Australia and India. And also, just my final point is to encourage interventions very early on in the education system. So I'm thinking at the school level. Australia has a vet in schools, a vocational education and training program for schools where students are taught skills. It's a different kind of skills to the university high-level skills, but still an important part. But even apart from that, I think there's opportunities to provide science, technology, engineering and mathematics training into the curricula, especially for girls. We're trying to create a pipeline of tech talent that will come through. So we need to think generationally about, inculcating these skills at a very early age so that in 20 years' time, when they're graduating from their courses at university, they're so tech savvy from having done it all through their education system. So I think there's lots of opportunities for Australia and India to work together in those areas.
Thank you, Dr. Barker. On that note, we thank you, Dr. Taneja, Dr. Barker, and Mr. Eggleston for that insightful discussion of the past hour or so. The discussion has so very well captured the nuances of the trade relations between India and Australia, and going ahead, what all sectors and areas we could, concentrate on to propel this relation further, to perhaps even have a, comprehensive economic cooperation agreement in the future. It was an honor to host you this evening. Thank you to all the participants for logging in and listening so intently. Please do not hesitate to send us your questions, which will be passed on to the speakers. Through the AIIPOIP Taskforce, we look forward to more fruitful engagements with you all through our webinars, conferences, podcasts, and many more events. Please follow our website and social media pages for further updates. With this, I would like to formally close today's proceedings. Wishing you all a lovely evening and a great weekend ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.